it's Christine McDaniel here, host of the Coliving Code Show with another weekly episode. And this time I have Jorick Beijer on the interview today. And we actually met for coffee in Amsterdam a few months ago, just to talk all things co-living. This guy is a wealth of knowledge. And what I want to do to give context, because he's not an actual operator, but he's so deep in this world and has been for so long. I want to go ahead and read his bio really quickly to give that context. So he is a born and raised urbanist with a passion for all things co-living, the urban campus, and sticky cities, which I'm going to ask him to go into detail about sticky cities. Jorick has a comprehensive and international approach to urbanism acquired through his studies in urban design and planning obtained in between Delft, which is a city about an hour out of Amsterdam, and also Los Angeles and Buenos Aires. So he's actually lived in those three major cities around the world. So he'll talk about that. And as a urban strategist, Jorick has vast experience in working on forward-thinking projects for governments, real estate investors, and universities, bringing together complex multi-stakeholder teams. He is a visiting studio teacher at Delft University of Technology and a global keynote speaker in the city space. And over the last couple of years, he was actually the director and driving force over at the Class of 2020, which is Europe's leading think tank on student living, working, and learning. They're based in Amsterdam. And with over 90 global partners, the class is well positioned in the nexus of alternative investments, urbanism, and talent management. They also provide thought leadership through original research, advisory projects, publications, and organized events. So welcome to the show, Jorick. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the show.
I know, I know you were in The Hague now. We would have done it in person. Now I'm in London right now. So I've got a unique background. I'm at one of the hotel lobbies. If you guys hear lounge music in the background, that's why. So what took you over back to The Hague?
Well, I mean, I'm now officially on my summer sabbatical, which I'm enjoying with a lovely view on the one of the forests in The Hague near my apartment. So it's a good time. I mean, today it's bloody hot in the Netherlands, as you know, and it's good to be here in a bit more of a sort of a breezy part of the country, an hour from Amsterdam, not much more.
Yes, awesome. So let's start with sticky cities, because even when I've never heard that term, believe it or not. And so when I read it in your bio, I was just like, oh, let's start there.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things in the whole discourse around cities, and especially from and one of my lenses always has been talent attraction and retention. And I mean, I don't have to talk about urbanization and globalization, but we all see that cities are becoming really spiky elements. And so if you watch the entire globe, you see that people all move towards cities. And so there's this sort of a spiky component to it. I always like to call it sticky, because I think what we need to do, and we at large, is to make talent stick to cities. So, I mean, I think we have to build upon that idea of urbanization and globalization, and really try to build the right spaces, the right co-living spaces, the right universities, the right co-working spaces to make talent stick. Because I think that is very fundamental to solving the 21st century problems of cities all over the world.
No, definitely. And have you seen, and I saw a stat just real quickly, and I don't know how true it was, I didn't dive into it. It said 71% of graduates from the Los Angeles universities actually leave Los Angeles. That sounds pretty high, but maybe that's correct. So I don't know, do you have any numbers or stats off the top of your heads of some major cities?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to see there's a lot of dynamics in between different specializations. And so what you do see quite often all around the world is that certain sort of cohorts of students are keen to move away very quickly. In the Netherlands, we do see it, for example, in the more peripheral universities in the country, which are actually really good, but then the job potential is not as great. And then you see students from Groningen or Maastricht moving to Amsterdam massively. And I think that is a very sort of contemporary phenomenon, which I think is almost sort of being catalyzed by a lack of housing. So in that sense, Berlin, for example, is a good a good example of a city that is actually really attractive for young people, but it becomes harder and harder for graduates to find housing. And then they sort of start seeking for other tier 2 cities, maybe alike in Germany or even beyond, because also the mobility, not only of students, but especially of graduates, is incredibly high in Europe nowadays.
Yeah, and so you living in the and so with sticky cities. So see, Amsterdam, I guess it worked on me. It's a sticky city. I stayed. I
Yeah,
wasn't even
yeah.
supposed to stay. But that's really, I do, see the need to do that, to keep people, making sure that the resources are there so that they feel like they can stay and they can thrive, and you guys aren't losing, these cities aren't losing talent.
Mm.
So with you living in those 3 major cities, around the world, and they're so different, were there any similarities you found, between Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, Delft?
Well, I think Delft is a sort of a strange one in that collection. So when I studied in Delft, and Delft is a tiny city in the Netherlands, but it is a well-regarded university city. It has one of the architecture faculty is top 5 in the world, so it's a really good school. But when I was studying in Delft, I lived both in Rotterdam and in The Hague, because for me, sort of Delft definitely didn't have that kind of metropolitan flair to it, which I think is a great similarity between Buenos Aires and Los Angeles. Very different cities, LA being super dispersed. I mean, as you know, and Buenos Aires being a very centric city, but both have sort of that kind of the global cosmopolitan taste to it, which I think is very appealing to people that are now flocking all over the world. So, and that's also what we see. It's not, the mobility is not from country to country, but people curate, so to say, their life path much more based on cities than they actually do in countries. And so it's I think these kind of, we call it kind of Jenga tower pathways, where people compose and they move to a city, they become an entrepreneur, they sell a company, they move to another city. So instead of like a linear career, people are sort of building their life pathways almost much more as Jenga stacks, and that is a tale of cities for sure.
Nice. And so that, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, I know you're super deep into student accommodations, and I know, I want to get your professional opinion on what's happening between student accommodations and co-living. Okay. So are they intersecting? Are they merging? Is there just an evolution happening with student accommodation that's turning into co-living? Like, how do you take those 2 terms that we keep hearing, and what do you make of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe to start with your final point, I think we hear a lot of it, but I've not seen so much of it. So I think in Europe, there is an enormous buzz around co-living, but we could have a long talk, you and I, on the definition of co-living. And what I see nowadays is also served apartments being branded as co-living, which kind of, for me, miss the communal collective component to it. But that's maybe sort of a side note. I do think in general that it's very much an evolution of the student housing products. So where in Europe we started with PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation, 5, 6, 7 years ago. The UK was far ahead at 20, 30 years. And I think we have been sort of raising a generation of people that got used of high quality professional student accommodation. And then it's a big leap after graduation to all of a sudden do a flat share on the normal rental markets in London or in Berlin or in Amsterdam. So I think we kind of made, we as sort of the student housing providers, I think they almost gave birth themselves to a new generation of people that are looking for service apartments after graduation. So I think people got really used to the sharing aspects. I think they got used also to the sort of the full service component of it. And I think also the flexibility of it is very appealing to millennials or Gen X, Y, Z alike. So I think it's definitely something that has been emerging really quickly. But I'm very curious to see like what kind of platforms. I know you had Reza on the show a couple of days ago. very curious to see what kind of platforms will build up a certain scale and take co-living away from the sort of more one-off boutique examples that we want out. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I know you know Reza really well at the Collective, and you also know Charlie at Student Hotel. So what, you know, and they both have amazing, amazing products. You know, what do you see, you know, their evolutions just from you kind of knowing them and watching them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's my position to comment on both of their business models, but it's interesting to see that I think both them, but also a couple of other thought leaders, real thought leaders in the industry, I think they all start from a same sort of fundamentals, that you want to really sort of revolutionize urban living. And so you want to offer people a product which is super contemporary, really progressive. I think the difference is in one way maybe in sort of the cohort, so the kind of audience that you're serving, which could be a bit more leaning towards students or to hotel guests. I think there's also big markets for young professionals, and especially if you see it from a B2B perspective. Now with high potentials, traveling all over the world really quickly, I think there is a huge market for short stay co-living schemes in well-positioned business cities. We were in Hong Kong early this year, and we saw some really good examples of good living spaces for people that did like a sort of a 1 month exchange for McKinsey or for Shell or for these kind of companies. And that is a very interesting cohort, and I think so. There's a bit of variation around what kind of people you're serving, but I think the philosophy is very much the same.
Definitely. No, let's talk about Asia, because that area is seeing insane, tremendous growth. You said Hong Kong, and you visited Singapore, right? Like, what are some trends that you see in the Asian market?
Yeah, I mean the student housing. So we went to study the student housing scene, and we turned out to learn a lot about the co-living scene, because the student housing market and we did Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong. It's very, very immature. So it's all still on campus, offered by the university. The stock is pretty old, and so that's not much of a learning curve there. But I think what was interesting for us was to see the amount of co-living schemes popping up really quickly. And like I said before, some of them were quite boutique. I really appreciated Weave, the Nate, co-hosts in Shanghai we visited. Very nice schemes. Really well positioned, but a player like Hamlet is going really on proper scale there. All of them, or most of them, serving to the young professionals, internationals, so people that have a reasonable salary but want to live very urban, are not looking to buy a house, which is also pretty tough. I mean, we're talking about some of the most dense real estate markets in the world. Think of Hong Kong. So it's interesting also to discuss co-living as as a response to the increasing housing prices all over the world, which I think in one way it is. But on the other hand, it might also even drive up real estate prices even more, because then the more people you can now stack on a square meter, and the more that also affects the price of your land. But that's quite an interesting thing. And I think the potential for co-living in Asia is really big, probably bigger than it is in Europe.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And then did you go into India at all? Because that's like a super big market.
Yeah. That's what everyone told me. You should go to India. Yeah.
Oh, you haven't yet?
I haven't. No. That isn't, of course. I mean, the absolute scale of it is tremendous. And we didn't have the chance to visit, but I think that is a very, very strong market. We do see quite some online sort of living platforms for student housing, but also for service departments. There are quite some pioneers coming out of India, but I'm very curious who will be the first international player to move into the India space.
No, and that was my next question for you. And I've asked a few people on the show is like, who is going to be that global player? Like, is there a current brand that you think of like, okay, they have the potential to be the big global player, similar to how the hotels, Marriott, Hilton, there's none of that yet in the student accommodation or co-living sector yet. Do you think it's going to be somebody that's already existing, or do you think it's just going to be a brand new player?
One of the things I learned while we were organizing the different tours towards Asia, but also Australia, is there isn't much globalization when it comes to the industry. And so you see capital being super liquid and global. And so a lot of investment in UK schemes is coming out of Singapore, for example. Obviously the students are super global themselves, but there isn't really a strong global, sort of a global collective of players. GSA, Global Student Housing player, is doing that with some schemes in Australia, also in Japan. Scape is now building a portfolio in UK and in Australia. But I'm really curious. I think the capital will be global for sure. But given that the markets are so different from one each other, I do think there's also a lot to say for just various operating platforms. But maybe, as you say, I think the platformization, so to say, that we see with the hotel chains, Accor, I don't know, has 35 to 40 brands. There are a couple of student housing players that have 3 or 4, so there's still a long way to go. But the scale was also really different then.
Yeah, no. I think you're right. You're right about that. And yeah, it's just been interesting. I think what I've just, from my perspective thus far, I see people just nailing their model down in their current country, which actually makes a lot of sense, right? Making sure that the systems are in place and everything is really easy to then deploy into a different country.
Yeah.
Because then it just kind of throws, you've got different currency and you've got languages and you've got, different things to consider. So I think that everybody I've talked to, even the really big players, they're usually trying to nail their current country first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what you see quite often is then, if they then decide sort of to make the big step over the Atlantic, for example, is that you see more M&As on entire portfolios. That's what Greystar did. That's what GSA did in Spain, for example, which makes it also easier to start. It's because then you basically buy a good current operating platform. On that note, I'm actually quite curious who of the European players will maybe move into the American space, because I do think, it's interesting to see that there are a couple of big American investors going into the European residential space. But I think there's a ton of work to do still in the US. So I'm curious who will move sort of back into that space. And I think also South America, maybe sort of coming back on Buenos Aires. I think cities like BA or also Bogota have a really good potential for these kind of products.
Yes, Selena's doing a great job in South America. Yeah, it's probably one of my favorites in that, and they've kind of captured that market, but not a lot of other players are going into that area yet. No. I don't know why.
There's a free advisor on the show. Yeah.
and you're right. And you're right. Europe, and now that I've been here for almost 4 months, and just in deep with the co-living world of Europe, after being in the States, everybody always asks, what are the differences? Who's growing quicker? And it's pretty, from my opinion, they're being done differently, but it's probably pretty neck and neck. Like if I said, but there's different metrics, right? Like how many beds, everybody has their different way of measuring growth, right? Whether it's revenue or bed count or unit count. So I think both are doing tremendous jobs and leaps and bounds in the spaces, just with different perspectives. But you're right. It'll be interesting to see like who kind of cross-pollinates, who jumps over to the other continent, and is that product. But even the collective, they're in New York. So there's been a few already that are jumping over, and they kind of start east, and then I think they're moving west. Yeah.
No, I think it's also giving sort of a much more potential for learning. I think for some of for the American players, it has been quite a sort of mindset shift when they enter the European space. Just to talk about the student accommodation sector, in terms of amenities, I mean, that is still far from some of the things we see in the US. I mean, in Europe, we don't really do indoor bowling lanes or indoor pools. And so I think there's a lot of stuff, not only for amenities. One of the things for me very important, and a lot of the US players have been absolutely pioneering residential life programs and mental health. I think that is stuff that in Europe we can learn a lot about. So I think it's only good that we get this sort of more reciprocity, so to say, between the different continents.
No, definitely. And I think collectively, I don't think that there's like, even being in the States, I know it seems super competitive, but I do see, things being shared and people kind of helping each other out when it comes to how to build these communities. Mm. And let's dive into the word community. Again, I do like to do this too. And I am, tomorrow I'm speaking here in London. I'm finishing my slide deck, and I'm like, I think the whole thing is revolving around, like, because I'm talking to actual investors, property investors. So the word community usually doesn't tie into the bottom line, so sometimes I need to clarify.
Also, investors have their own communities, huh?
Yeah, right. exactly. So let's talk about that. I think you could build these amazing community spaces in these large buildings, but how do you activate those spaces? How do you just saying the word community on your website doesn't mean you have community, right?
No.
And I think co-living, I really believe, like, you can't have co-living without community. So what are some things that you've seen that have worked?
Yeah, well, I think I fully agree with you. And I think the first notion is that you can design as much communal space as you want, but that doesn't mean that you get a community. And so I think the activation of communal and residential life is really sort of a personal thing you need to do. So, and that's something for some of the investors, with something that they still have to pick up, is that this is something that is more difficult maybe to get in your first Excel sheets, but in the end, it's a key to the success of your scheme, because that is where you build up the value. And I think for me, the value is always more in the people than it is in the bricks and mortar. Even though I'm a trained architect. But I think this is really an investment of time and money in personal attention, good staffing. I think is key to the success. And I think what is interesting is what I've liked was that we sort of now saw also some of the European operators really trying also to measure the impact of their residential programs. So trying to sort of really survey the students, talk with students, really try to learn. And because I think also investing a lot of money and throwing a bunch of parties is also not really residential life. I think it's really about the meaningful interaction that you can make with the students. I think we've seen some of the students, housing officers in the UK doing an excellent job also in involving students themselves or residents themselves in developing these kind of programs. And this is something where you now see quite a clear divide between the good operators and the really good operators. Because it's not only, again, about what you build, but really how, especially if you think of that a lot of the growth of your scheme is coming from mouth-to-mouth promotional stuff. And so the investment that you do in the students and the way they talk about your building and your operational team, I think that is something that we should invest much more time in.
Those are great points, Jorick. For sure, I agree 110%. And even in the States, so now it's like enough time is starting to come by to see like what people, because again, it's such a new industry, a new concept, a new sector of real estate, co-living. So there hasn't been, you can't really Google, I kind of dug around for some reviews because I want to see if there are things that people don't like about the co-living concept. What are they? And again, I think enough time's going by, I finally dug some up, and it was, some of them are like, these units are being toured, their home is being toured at all hours of every day. Because some of these are actual apartment, like you said, like serviced apartment units. So it might be a 4-bedroom apartment. And in the lease, it states we can show your entire apartment and even your bedroom at any moment.
Yeah.
And I think that these residents didn't understand that when they moved in, and now, all hours of the day, people are kind of like touring their apartments.
You're living in a showroom. Yeah.
Exactly. And this, even I was like, whoa, these are things you don't think of when you're building, it's like trial and error on the business model, right?
Yeah.
Are there any things, are there any things that you think to look out for when somebody's kind of building out their concept, whether it's, in the co-living scheme or student accommodation, just things that you've kind of seen traveling the world to really pay attention to, other than the community building, obviously?
Yeah, no, sure. I think sustainability is a bit of a cliche, almost, because I think we should do it, sort of full stop. But I think for me, sustainability is almost sort of one step beyond the normal things you can do in your building with your windows and your heating, etc. I think there's a lot of social sustainability, which is not the same for me about community life, but really how do you sort of help students also to become an entrepreneur? How do you stimulate them to maybe to open a small shop? To also, how do you sort of view sustainability as a wider thing? So how do you think about inclusiveness, about diversity? I think that is for me one of the things really, really key to do. The other thing which I do like is also the whole discussion around technology, and it's a tricky one, like how with the pace of technology and how quickly that is developing, it's hard, and also given that real estate is so slow. I mean, a scheme from initial site inspection to opening, I mean, that takes easily 6 years. And it makes it tough also to think of how you want to engage with tech. What I sometimes almost feel is, I mean, don't go too wild on your design and sort of pumping up the specs of your building, but again, invest much more in the social fabric. I think that is something for me, because it's easier, it's more agile, you can tweak it, you can learn from it, you can measure results. I think that is a far better investment than doing one in stones.
And then speaking of technology, because again, that's my whole life, our wheelhouse, and there's so many things to automate and to try to use tech to help with that fabric of community. Are there things just off the top of your head where you're like, okay, because again, everybody who's spoken to, some of the biggest players in the world are still struggling on the tech side of things and automation.
I think in terms of tech, I think we can better look at the hospitality industry. I think in student accommodation, I mean, in Europe, it's a very young market still. It's also a market that still needs so much maturing before, and people see technology as something as an add-on. And so there's also a mind shift change, because I think it's a fundamental and not sort of a perk in the end. So I think we can learn a lot from the bigger hotel chains in terms of optimization. And I think the whole customer journey is something we need to explore better, like from searching to booking to check in. I think there's a lot of stuff we can do better, make more meaningful. It's not only about the ease, but also about the quality of it, and what kind of feeling you get from doing a certain routine. And I'm really curious on how we can push also technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, also in maybe in not only better understanding the room that you're booking, and by being able to walk through it, but also maybe by personalizing your space. I think that would be really cool. I mean, imagine that you travel the world like you do, and you walk into a room, there's a beacon picking up your preferences and turning the lighting in a certain color, maybe projecting some of your favorite paintings on the wall. I mean, all of that is doable. And I think there's a big step to make in terms of that kind of innovations.
Oh my gosh, Jorick, we could talk for like an hour on that. I love all that stuff. That's like because you're exactly right. The technology is already there.
Sure.
That's why I'm like, why is nobody implementing this yet? And I wish I remember the name of the hotel, and I'm blanking on it because I'd totally give them credit, but it was about a month ago I stayed somewhere and I checked in, and the whole, like you said, from the search to the booking to the check-in was so seamless, all done on technology. And the really rad thing was, like, after I checked in, within 20 minutes, it pinged my phone, hey, is there anything extra you need? You need towels, you need this. And that was really cool, because that was just such a seamless process, and it was like, wow, that's like above and beyond, but it wasn't a human doing it, right? It was all automated.
Yeah.
And it still gave me that great feeling. So you're exactly right. When it comes to technology, it needs to be that base, that foundation, and I think you're right. People are kind of like tacking it on at the end, and then they're trying to figure out how to incorporate it.
I think one of the problems, so to say, of innovation in general and tech innovation in the student housing space in Europe is that there is not enough competition yet. So it's almost the case, and I don't want to make it sort of sound too easy, but whatever you build, I mean, it's a fair chance to get a really good occupancy on it, because there's such a shortage of professional student housing, or in general housing in European cities. I mean, you faced it probably yourself in Amsterdam. It's just tough to find like a nice spot, a little bit central in the city for a reasonable price. And so as long as there's such a shortage with provisions for student housing ranging from 4 to 16% across Europe, there's not really a trigger to innovate your product really hard. So I mean, we might have to wait 5 years, Christine, to see this cool stuff popping up.
I'm gonna force it earlier than 5 years.
Good.
Everybody's okay. It's June 25th, 2019. It will not be 5 years until this is wrapped. I will make sure of that with Kindred. That's awesome. Well, perfect, Jorick. Well, I definitely, let's talk about what you're working on. I know you're on this awesome sabbatical, summertime sabbatical. And I know you've done keynotes around the world, and I know you consult with different student accommodations. Like when you're done, what is your next chapter, after the sabbatical? I mean, I know you're still going to be in this space. What are you hoping to do?
I mean, I cannot really give you a lot of insight on my negotiations, but I'm really keen to stay in the space. I mean, I feel really natural in the student housing co-living space. I had the chance to build up a strong network internationally. So what I want to do after the summer is to get a bit more hands-on involved. I think the class offered a great opportunity to study the industry from a think tank perspective, to really engage with a wide amount, 90 plus partners, and to grow that network and that ecosystem. But for me, it's now time to and maybe to join one of the players and to really go hands-on in making the product even better.
Good. See, that's that's perfect. That's what I wanted you to say. So then if somebody's listening or watching this show, Jorick, I can vouch for him. This guy knows his stuff. So we wanted to put it out there, but I can't wait to see what you have coming up next. I know it's going to be amazing. Whoever gets you on their team is going to be very, very lucky, especially with your background. So is there anything else you want to talk about before we end this interview?
No, I mean, I'm very curious what you think, maybe sort of as a final question, and let me take the opportunity to ask you one. What do you think as a potential of blending in different cohorts of people in the co-living sort of principle? I mean, we've seen a little bit of examples of merging intergenerational stuff, and I think there's a wider need in Europe for better residential products. We coined it once hybridization of the industry, and so sort of the same philosophy, but for different segments of the market. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's funny. So my original house in San Diego that I first lived in 2016, the Epic Entrepreneur House. So it was only entrepreneurs, and and the whole theme was around that. And same with Kindred Quarters, my concept. It was only entrepreneurs, and then we've kind of we evolved to allow other people in that weren't just entrepreneurs, because there's two ways of thinking, right? Sometimes you get stuck in a silo, but that silo starts pushing you up. And I know, and again, if somebody searches Entrepreneur House San Diego Union Tribune, the article, they got the front page of the business section of the San Diego newspaper this past weekend, which is an amazing article. And it's fun to see that how it helped all of, and they all make, their companies are doing millions a year. And that was the title, like these millennials are making over millions of, a year, but they choose to live in one house together. Why? And it was really neat to see that. And so I think there's pros and cons to a silo. I think a silo of like-minded people that are very similar can help propel you and push you up. But at the same time, sometimes there's not a good, diversity, the inclusion aspect. You're missing things that you can learn from a musician or an artist that lives with you that you would never, that's not business minded. So sometimes it's really cool to live in a space where there's all different types of people from around the world with different hobbies and different passions and different career paths. So I'm curious. I don't have that answer. I can't say it's going to go one way or the other, or maybe it just continues on or evolves. Student Hotel, Charlie talked. I loved walking to that lobby when I stayed there for the couple months and seeing, somebody in their 70s, 70-year-old playing ping pong with like a 19-year-old. And I was like, this is really cool. It was really super diverse. And I liked that too. So I think that everybody's going to find their tribe, just like the cavemen had their, they were in the caves hanging out with their tribes back in the day. And I think, there's going to be different tribes and people can find theirs, and it's fun to watch. It's really fun to watch the evolution, especially so fast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's striking how you sort of point out what we would call the serendipity component of it. How do you, and I think I've said once in a talk, we made a point about the sort of the potential for these kind of living spaces to really be like a petri dish for urban innovation. Like in science, I think these co-living schemes or student housing schemes really have the potential to sort of catalyze that kind of serendipity and to really push new innovations to happen. So I think maybe circling back to the sticky city, I think that is also why we should invest, also as cities, and we should invest in these kind of spaces, because I think they are fundamental in the process of urban and social innovation.
Without a doubt, I would love, and we're working with the city of Amsterdam, to try to pilot some co-living. And, our biggest thing is like, that's how you're going to bring this talent into your city. You guys say, we need more, we need more of Silicon Valley. We need more, tech innovation happening in our city. How do we get those people here? Well, there's no housing, which I experienced firsthand. It was so super difficult. But how do we, you build those communities, you make that available, and then that's how you attract talent to these cities around the world.
Yeah.
Making it easy, making it kind of plug and play, and making it so that, they could do a month or 3 months, and fall in love with the city and stay, or go back, or jump to the next major city around the world. Just like you said, the Jenga, I think that's such a great analogy, the Jenga pieces. Because you're right, it's just kind of plug and play, and nobody, and you've studied the younger generations are not going to sign a year lease. Like, let's just get real right now. They're not. They want freedom to jump from whatever city they want to jump to based on opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also it's great that you're already talking with the city government. It's the fundamental that we need to sort of solve is that probably people in economic affairs or innovation departments would agree with us, but now we need to convince the people in the housing departments to think about more flexible zoning, about sort of more space for products outside of the regulated market. And so we need to sort of also really work, you and I, on the crossovers between these different sort of governmental departments to really allow these kind of spaces to happen, and then for the innovation to flourish. I think that is, we need to sort of fix the mechanics a bit, but then the potential is enormous.
No, you're right. And it is a catch-22. And I sit on both sides of the argument is that the Dutch people that have lived in Amsterdam for so long are getting priced out. So that's the other issue we're contending with. And I feel for them. They've lived in that city. Now they're literally getting priced out of their own city because all the expats are coming in and the pricing is driving up. So it's like, how do we how do we account for that too? And I think
Yeah.
that's the housing, you know, and of course those are the things the housing, you know, departments are trying to take into consideration.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think, but for me, the answer is quite simple. I know the Amsterdam case really well. I think the key to the solution is producing the right kind of housing and the right amount of housing. I mean, Amsterdam hasn't been building enough houses over the last 5 years, and now it's sort of hurting itself. And now it's the lack of residential space is sort of breaking down a bit or cracking the innovation ecosystem. And this is something we see in more European cities where city governments with a lot of control on the residential market have not been allowing enough real estate to be built over the last 5 years. And now everywhere you see this housing crisis ramping up really quick. So I think in the end, we just need to build a bit more.
No, and then why hasn't Amsterdam? So I don't, you know, I know Amsterdam's had this amazing renaissance in the last 5 years. You know, it's this amazing city now. But why do you think they didn't build housing? Why did they kind of slow down on that?
Yeah, you should try to get the deputy mayor for housing on your next podcast show. That would be interesting.
Okay.
But I think housing is very political. I think if you would make a quick scan of European capitals, you see that most of the mayors and governments are quite left oriented, which is not per se a bad thing, but is always a little bit problematic when it comes to real estate investments. So I think there is maybe a bit too much belief in sort of the social housing sector as being the one and only way sort of to house people in the city. I think this is really a fundamental political issue nowadays. And it's not only in Amsterdam, it's the same in Barcelona, it's the same in Madrid, Berlin, Paris. And I think we need to get all these kind of different people on the table. And I think the sort of the political rationale of sort of excluding investors, private investors or international investors, and of the wider discussion around housing, I think that is a fundamental problem because I think we can only solve this catch-22 through working on it together. I really believe that. And so the exclusion strategy of the city of Amsterdam, as an example, it hasn't been very helpful, regretfully. And I think now it's also hard to catch up.
Interesting. Super interesting. I know that's hard. It's such a hard balance, right? Because I will tell you, and you lived in Los Angeles. Did you ever get to drive? Did you go drive down Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles at all ever when you were there?
I lived actually in Little Tokyo.
Okay.
So I lived very nearby. And that also is a city with all its problems. And one of the things I loved when I was in LA was the investment they were already making in bit by bit in public transport, for example. But of course, I mean, LA. I think maybe in a way, I think it's an interesting comparison. Los Angeles and the Randstad, the collective of the 5 biggest cities in the Netherlands, because they have more or less the same size. They have around 15 million inhabitants. The Netherlands versus Greater LA, but the governance models work really different. And I think we need to do a bit more learning on that side.
No, exactly. Because, you know, and that was the thing when I got into Amsterdam, you know, an Uber driver, we're driving around. I forget I said, "Oh, there's no homeless." And he goes, "Well, no, we house them." and we had that, you know, and it was just like, wow, you know, again, coming from Los Angeles, coming from, you know, 55,000 homeless people, which is an insane amount of number of people. And it's embarrassing to even say that, you know, that our country has that many people living on the streets. But again, it's just that balance between socialism and, you know, how do we make everybody happy and make it work for everybody. But that was just a really unique thing that, you know, you're in a city where you don't ever see homeless on the street ever, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and absolutely. I mean, I definitely don't want to rant against the are we still there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I definitely don't want to rant against the city of Amsterdam or Dutch politics in general, because we've been building a tremendous welfare system over the last 50 years. But I think there's a lot of stuff to do, especially now in this sort of quickly transforming global order of talent, and maybe to circle back to that topic.
Okay, Jorick. Well, I knew we'd have an incredible interview. I thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's been a great pleasure.
Yes. And then again, we'll have all your contact information below so people can reach out to you. Again, you're an amazing keynote speaker. You know the space very well. And so they can reach out if they have any more questions about what we've talked about. Yes. And thanks again.
No, thank you. And good luck in London and on your incredible journey across the European continent.
Yes, it's been fun. Okay,
great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you want to learn more about co-living, you could check out my book on Amazon, The Co-Living Code. And of course, if you're looking for the perfect software to power your co-living concept, check out kindred.io, KNDRD.io. Thanks.